Hi, welcome to Nature Sketch Create's Giant Pacific Octopus step-by-step painting instructions video. In this video I'll be showing you how to paint the giant Pacific octopus using Nature Sketch Create's step-by-step painting instructions. The first thing you want to do is collect your materials, make sure they're all ready to go. Remember, this is just a sketch. Relax, have fun, and if you make any mistakes, don't worry too much about it. The first thing you want to do is transfer the image to the watercolor paper. Go ahead and tape the top of the transfer image to the back of the watercolor paper, just like that. And open it up. Put your graphite transfer paper dark side down, light side up, and close it down. Go ahead and get started anywhere you like, just tracing over all the lines. They do not have to be exact, so don't worry too much about that. If you make mistakes, it's not a big deal. After making a few marks though, you will want to kind of hold down one side and flip it up and see how those lines are transferring. And if they're transferring, if you put your transfer paper on right, the graphite transfer paper down with the dark side down. If you do the other side, the lines won't transfer. And you want to use a medium pressure, so your lines should look something like that. Then just go ahead and go through, relax, maybe zen out a little bit, maybe have some music on in the background, and just trace over all those lines. You can easily come back to this project if you have to drop it for whatever reason. You don't have to do it in one sitting. When you're finished, you'll want to make sure that all of the lines are actually transferred to your watercolor paper before you take the painter's tape off. Just double check it a few times and then gently pull the painter's tape off. You want to keep the transfer image to help protect your painting from smudges later on from your hand. And you can reuse the tape too if you want to. I usually do. Kind of set it to the side. And you want to take your kneaded eraser or any eraser. Let's be very gentle if you're using a different eraser on the watercolor paper, not to ruin it. But if you take the kneaded eraser, just gently go over it a little bit in the areas where the lines got a little dark on the transfer, or any unnecessary unwanted spots where the graphite transferred that you didn't really want. sometimes that happens if you're putting pressure on the transfer paper, but I find that this particular transfer paper is really great about not leaving unwanted marks compared to other brands. So when you're done, go ahead and move on to step 2. In step 2, you're going to mix the color and paint in the first layer. So start with the 15H permanent red and take 2 drops, 1, 2, and then the 13H Hansa deep yellow, and 2 drops of that as well, 1, 2. And you can mix it up, and you can, at this time, add a little pressure to your paintbrush, your water brush, or add some water if you're using a regular brush. These paints are very concentrated and have beautiful, vibrant colors. And the first layer is going to be pretty wet, so you want to go ahead and add a lot of water. I pulled a bit off to the side because we're going to want some dry and some wet for parts of this painting, and in between it'll dry a little bit, but I like to have a drier side and a wetter side, so just take a bunch of that paint down to the other side of my palette. It's like a large space for painting, and I think it has enough water. Looks like it's pretty wet. I can test it out here on my little test strip of watercolor paper. It looks great. And you can retest it throughout the whole painting process. And in between, you want to just dab off a little bit of the paint on your cloth or your towel, whatever you have. I'll put that to the side. And it's best to start here in the mantle and work your way slowly down into the body, past the eyes, onto the eyes, the siphon, down into the arms. I'm going to avoid the suction cups for now, but if you get some in there, don't worry too much about it. So go ahead and add a little bit more water again. You want it to be pretty light. Dab it off onto your cloth and go ahead and start painting. I like to start on the edges, pulling the paint down and then re-wetting those inside edges. So any of this will end up creating a line in your painting that you let dry. So it's good to reincorporate, re-wet those, a little bit of water and paint. Just kind of pulling the paint down with little strokes through the mantle here. Just kind of pulling it. It does not have to be consistent. In fact, the inconsistencies make this unique. Every time watercolor seems to be different because you can't control it 100%. Maybe some people can, but it's rare. So you just kind of pull it down and don't get too caught up on what that watercolor decides to do. Just have fun, pull that paint in. And I recommend working in these open areas and then like this lined area of its own, do that next to help prevent any lines drying in your painting that you don't want. And if they do, again, it's fine because it's just for fun and it's your sketch. So just relaxing and adding in color here. So looks like I filled in all the spaces with that first layer. As you can see, there are some areas a little darker than others, have a little bit of the paint outside of the lines, and that's all great, fine. Everything's going to work out really well at the end. Just have to have this initial color down. Then you can move on to step 3. Once your painting is dried, you can go ahead and move on to step 3, painting in the darker octopus red-orange. So the best way to start with that, to find a color that is a little darker than A and a little lighter than B, something in between, to add some definition. So you can add water to your watercolor paint, dab it off on your cloth, and then apply it. And I actually think that's a little too wet, so I'll get a little bit of this drier media here and make sure not to add any more water. Dab it off a little bit. By dabbing it off just a tad, just very lightly, you'll get less of the paint transferred from your brush to the towel, which will make this more concentrated when you put it on the paper. So a little lighter pressure here. So you get something a little bit more concentrated to work with there. You can use this image to protect your painting while you're working. And again, I like to start at the top left of the painting. So I'm going to start at the mantle again here. And I'm going to go around the edges, just like in the painting step-by-step image. This around the mantle has these darker edges. And you can redefine those lines a little bit if you want to add some extra grooves. And you'll notice that there are even more grooves and squiggly lines added in step 3 on the mantle. So you can add lots and lots. And they'll be seen a little bit darker on the bottom and then a little lighter as you move to the center where the light's hitting. You won't see those grooves quite as much. And then they'll be a little darker at the top too. So there might be more and darker grooves. And in order to make that just a little lighter, you can just dab your paintbrush on your cloth and then go ahead and move through to add definition to that mantle. Just reapply the paint to your brush and then back on the cloth before you apply it to your painting itself. And keep moving down the octopus. And I'm constantly looking at step 3 to refer to for where to put the paint. You can also refer to your final image, but it'll be a little easier to look at the step-by-step. A little bit there on the body and then the arms, and then wash it back up. So I'm basically just pushing the paint around a little bit and get a little bit of water into my brush as I dab it off onto my paper towel. And then once I put that back on my paper, that ends up adding more water so I can wash that paint a little bit more to different parts. I'm bringing this paint, this kind of washing it into the octopus. I'm still working in the same areas, so starting in one space, and then I'll move on to another space, working in sections. And this is your painting, so if there's a spot that you think you'd like to add a little bit more definition, go for it. And then again, I'm moving left to right so that I don't make any smudges. It's a bit different if you're left-handed. And I'm also protecting my painting while I'm painting with this image here. So your hands tend to have a little bit of grease on them. So none of this is exact, you're just adding some color just to add some definition. Again, just refer to your reference painting. You can add a little bit more water on the cloth, and that'll bring some water into your painting to kind of wash it through that space a little bit more. So step 3 is done. Go ahead and let it dry and then move on to step 4. Now that step 3 is dry, we can move on to step 4. I'm going to add a little bit of the drier, darker octopus red orange, and both just to deepen some of these areas, but also a little bit of darker washes over the octopus. So the first thing you want to do is find a drier area on your palette here. Take a little bit of that paint. You can add a tiny bit of water if you need to or not. Dab it and check and see what color it is. I like it a little darker, so I don't want to add any water there. That's pretty dark. So that's what this little test strips are for. It's the same kind of watercolor paper, and to have the scrap paper like this lets you see what the watercolor will look like before you add it to your painting. So we'll look at both the reference image and step 4's image to see where these lines might go. And it looks a little different in each one, because in these other images, in the final image, it has a little bit more of the deep yellow, lots of deep yellow color in there, adding a nice highlight that really stands out against the darker shading. So you want to refer definitely to step 4 on this one to figure out where this darker shading is, and it's going to be down here on the mantle. It's kind of like an outline. Pick up a little more. Always dab off your paint just a little bit onto your cloth so that you can control it properly. I'm going to darken some of these squiggly lines on the mantle. And then kind of within these grooves as well. And I'm ready to work on this part of the octopus, but I'm going to go ahead and do a wash on the mantle. So I got some wetter wash, not too wet, not too dry, and test it here. I want a little bit more concentrated than that, so add a little bit more of the drier color, and then just kind of look at the picture and start it in one side and just kind of pull it over and look a little darker than that. So I'm going to grab a little bit more, and the color is only going to go in the area that you've already gotten wet. It's not going to mess up those lines that you have. Make it a little darker because those lines are dry. I'm going to add it just down here in the bottom, and then the color will move up a little bit to the top. Let's add a nice gradient there for that space in the bottom of the mantle. And then we'll do the same thing here on the top. And I didn't think that was too dark at all, so I'm just going to add a little more. I'll add a little bit more throughout here, leaving that space mostly blank. Always err on the side of being on the lighter side because you can always add more paint. Just keep adding a little bit, letting it wash a little bit into that this wash I created here in this space. So I put the dark color here where I want it to be a little darker. It'll naturally move a little bit down towards the center of this mantle. And here too, you can see I added a color here, and it washes just a little bit into here, and I can help it out if I don't think it's going quite as far as I'd like. Now that I have that wash over the mantle, I'm going to start working on this right side of the image. That works for me. So when you're happy with the shading for step 4, you can go ahead and let it dry and move on to step 5. Now that your painting is dry, you can move on to step 5. In this step, be adding a little bit of darker shading throughout. And then when those darker areas dry, you can add wash over the darker areas. Definitely wait for them to dry before you do that. There was a little bit of lint or something that fell into this arm here, and I waited until the paint was dry before moving that off. I did also make some more paint. So again, I'll mix it up a little bit just to make sure it's well mixed. Adding maybe a little bit of water, getting a bit of a wetter side, the drier stuff. I don't want it too wet because we're working in drier washes right now. That same dark color again. And be doing this step over and over until you get it to this level of shading that you want it to be at. This is your painting, so you can make that decision. You can do that based on the final images you have here on each step and the final image you have here, or just what you feel you like to see in your octopus painting. It's also important to start a little bit light and keep working that up slowly, depending on how comfortable you are with the paint. You can always add more. So I like the darkness in this mantle for the most part. I think I just want to deepen a few of the areas right here on the bottom. And then just a little bit on the top here as well. This gives the mantle more of a rounded shape. And there might be just a few spots, just real sparingly, where the roofs will be a little bit darker. I'm gonna let that dry and then I'll come back and do a bit of a wash over it. And in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and work around here, down to the siphon. This area is pretty dark, so I'm gonna go ahead and bring some paint in there a little bit more. Maybe a little more here too. So you can see how that starts to look a little bit more circular because the light's hitting here. And we'll add a wash and that'll look even more cylindrical, circular, round. Bring this paint in here. Again, around the siphon. I'll probably come back to the siphon, wait till this outside area is dry and then come back in here. And adding the definition pretty much this darker color through the areas we've already added it, just making it even just a little bit darker. So I'm going to sit and look at this for a second to see if I like the level of definition in every spot. If it's a little too light in some areas, just add some more paint. Nothing too dark, just a nice little wash. And I think I like where it's at. So I don't think I need to add any more layers myself, but if you need to do it, go ahead and take your time, wait for it to dry before adding another layer, and then keep repeating this step as much as needed. And then once it's dry, you can move on to step 6. Once step 5 is dry, go ahead and move on to step 6. In this step, you'll be adding highlights using the Hansa Deep Yellow. So go ahead and grab some Hansa Deep Yellow, shake it up a little bit to make sure that the color is mixed, so you get the right concentration of color in your painting. And I'm just going to put in this empty space here with 2 drops. You could probably just get away with just 1. Rinse your brush out. Make sure that the color is coming out clear. from your brush. It doesn't have to be perfect, but really close to nothing. I'm going to move this around too so I don't pick up any of this when I'm using this dab. And add a little bit of color, a little bit of water to this color. And then kind of spread it out and then add more water right here. I need a wetter wash. This is a pretty small space. I could have used any of this part of my palette. And that might be easier for you. I just decided to keep it all in the same area. Just slowly adding some water, mixing it in, dabbing it off. And again, we'll test it out. Need to add a little bit more water to it. It's a bit dark. I might actually go ahead and turn this around and use more space. Probably because I used 2 drops instead of 1. Just too concentrated. I need more space to add more water. There we go. If you make any kind of mistakes, there's always a way to fix it. So in this case, it moved the paint over. And again, you want to start with a pretty light color. Very wet. And you can really tell in this final image where a lot of this Hansa Deep Yellow is. You can see it's in the suction cups as a very light wash. So I think I'll start there and just go around from left to right in these suction cups. The next part you want to add is to the body. So again, starting in the mantle and moving our way in to the arm, down to the body and into the arms. Grabbing your wash, adding a little more water because this has been pretty concentrated already. We're just adding highlights, so nothing too crazy. We can add these in a couple layers as well. So go ahead and start a little light. And it looks like we have highlights throughout the whole thing. And I added a little light. I would like a little bit more concentrated than that. And test it out. It looks more concentrated. Adding a little more water. And then adding that. And I like that color, that level. Just kind of not the whole thing, just kind of throughout, sparingly throughout. A little bit more in the darker spaces. So the highlights be in the areas that are lighter. But this color just brings another level of vibrancy to the image. And shows up best in those areas that we left lighter. And it really shows up in that print for some reason. In the scan for the final image, it gives you a really good idea of where I applied it. And if you get outside the lines, you can redefine that just like I did here. And then you can just make those into some new tentacles. And that a little fuzz came off, so I took that off my brush. Just kind of adding this all over the place. A little bit more, running low. I'm just transferring it from this side of my palette to this side because there's a lot there. That's why I had to move, it was just too concentrated. A little bit more up here now that it's dried. Scenes that I like that, and around the eye as well. I'm like getting a lot of this color throughout. It just gives it another level of dimension. It makes it more interesting to look at. Let's make this arm a little bit wider here. And then turn this outside area to suction cups that are still small. The suction cups on the octopus start out larger towards the body and then get smaller as they get to the end of the arms. And you'll also notice they're basically in rows of 2 here, one on each of the outer sides. And this being arm 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then again on this side 1, 2, 3, and 4, moving to the back. So I like this. I think that's a good amount of highlights for me in my image. You can bring that to whatever level you'd like. I'm gonna let this dry and then move on to step 7. After step 6, you can move on to step 7, adding in the micron ink lines. And you'll want to start with the 005 micron. It's the thinner of the microns. It's very thin lines. I'm going to apply a medium pressure and still want to protect your painting using this transfer image for your hand. And some of your lines might be visible and some of them might not. So you can look at your reference image to see where those lines belong. Or you can just trace based on what you see in your image from your transfer lines, whichever works. And spaces like right here where there's a line here, but there is the paint here, you can decide whether you want that inside or outside of your painting, of your octopus mantle. So here, I think I want to keep that inside, so I'm going to redefine those lines. And some of it ends up being on the outside. It's not meant for perfection, just kind of having a good time, relaxing, doing some drawing. So here we have the whole octopus outlined, and with the 0.005 micron. Now we're going to use the 0.1 micron to go ahead and add some definition and to write in the name and the scientific name. So I'm ready to do the name first. And even though I have this here to refer to, I also want to look at this because the transfer isn't perfect. And this won't be perfect either because it's not typed, but just handwritten. It'll be stylized, it'll be fun. A little rough around the edges. And lastly, go ahead and add that definition to the octopus itself. So you can look at this image to tell exactly where these lines go. Lots of different spaces. They're a little thicker to add a little bit of defining areas throughout the whole image. And if there's a spot you would like to add a little bit extra to, go for it. And I like how that looks, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And I like the level of color in it as well. If you'd like, you can add more paint to this in order to build up the color a little bit, or you can add more lines to deepen and darken some of those lines. This is your painting, so you get to choose what you want to do with it. So now you're done. You painted a giant Pacific octopus. Great job. And I hope you had a chance to relax and had some fun. You have a few options of what to do with this painting now. You can gift it, you can punch holes in it and add it to your sketchbook, you can frame it and display it at your house or someone else's house, and make sure to also post it on our Facebook fan art page. I'd love to see it. Make sure to sign up for updates on future releases of lessons at naturesketchcreate.com.